Hello. Well, there's a brief lull in the rain, so I can start to tackle the winter pruning of our cordon apples and pears. Now, anything I say about pruning today is probably quite specific to restricted forms of the pome fruit. Of course, any sort of pruning does depend a lot on the growth and fruiting habits of the tree in question. So you wouldn't prune an apple in the same way as you'd prune a peach, for example. And then even within the apples, you would treat a spur-bearing type differently from a tip-bearing type. So what I'm doing today is winter pruning of the cordons behind me. So they are pruned twice a year, once in summer, or probably quite late summer actually, and then again in winter. And those two tasks are completely different. So the summer pruning is in many ways the easy one. If somebody asked how to go about summer pruning a cordon or an espalier, you could give maybe 3 or 4 simple rules that if you follow them throughout, you're going to do a good job. Winter pruning is different because it requires more judgment, and rather than specific rules, all we can say really are some of the objectives, some of the things we're trying to achieve. So we don't have those same simple rules of thumb to follow for winter pruning. So in the summer, the idea is to remove all of the young whippy growth that's been put on and cut that back quite hard, and in that way try to stimulate the formation of fruit buds. So you remove most, if not all, of the new growth. Sorry, very noisy goose just flying over. In the winter, when all the leaves are gone and the fruit's gone and all that summer growth has been cut back, you've got the opportunity to review the structure of the tree, and you make such cuts as are necessary to maintain the health and productivity. So although there aren't any simple rules to follow for winter pruning, there are some things that one should always look for when pruning. Diseased wood, damaged wood, crossing wood and suckers are a good place to start. So for diseased and damaged wood, you want to cut back into good, solid, healthy wood. Now occasionally you'll find a major limb that shows some sign of disease or has some damage on it, and you can't cut that out without really trashing the tree. So in those cases you have to make a judgment on what to do with that. But normally if you're looking at a side branch and something that can be pruned back, you want to cut back any wood that shows signs of disease, and also you want to remove any damage, so that any point where there's damage to a branch, that's a potential entry point for disease. So once you've got rid of damaged and diseased wood, then there's crossing wood. So anytime 2 branches are crossing, you've got 2 potential problems there. First of all, you've got overcrowding, and overcrowding's not good anyway. You want a nice open, well ventilated structure to a tree. So you want to relieve overcrowding anyway. But when the wood is crossing, there can be rubbing in the wind, and that can wear off the bark, and again you've got an entry point for disease. So one or other of those branches, possibly both, will need to be cut back to resolve any crossing wood. And then the fourth one is suckers. So those are shoots that are coming up from the rootstock. So they're coming from below the graft union, and those we don't want at all. And I can show you some examples on a couple of the pears. So these shoots here, for example, those are all coming up from the rootstock, and all these need to be cut off. This isn't a bad example. The tree next door is rather worse. This has a lot of growth coming up here, and all of that needs to be cut back. Rootstocks are highly variable in their inclination to throw up suckers. So there are, I think, 3 in this line of 9 pears that are quite prone to it, and the rest of them are fine. But that's something else that needs to be dealt with routinely. So once you've dealt with disease, damage and crossing wood and removed all the suckers, then it's a question of what to do with what's left. So the general idea is to thin out overcrowded parts of the tree. So when you first plant out a cordon or an espalier, it's going to take some years to establish, and winter pruning, really, there's almost nothing to do for the first few years, but eventually you end up with overcrowded spur systems and just too much growth. So you'll probably have more fruit buds than you need, more than the tree can properly bring to fruition. Then you'll have branches that are getting in each other's way, and just general crowding, and that wants to be relieved. So you've got better airflow through the tree, and it's not trying to produce too much fruit. There are a few other things that you can look at. So vertical growth is not your friend. On any of these sorts of trees, vertical growth, that tends to be unproductive and overly vigorous. And indeed any side branches that are looking particularly vigorous, they could do with cutting back or complete removal, because that sort of vigorous growth, that puts on a lot of vegetation, but it doesn't produce much fruit. So overly vigorous and vertical growth can be tackled. And then you can look at whether you can remove some of the older and less productive wood in favour of newer growth. On my plants here, I've also got to remove a few whippy branches that were left during summer pruning, and that's not uncommon, at least for me. They put on so much growth during the summer, and I try to remove it all, but undoubtedly there will be a number of branches on each one of these that I've missed, and they need to be cut back. So I can give you some examples of the sorts of things I'm going to be tackling. So here, for example, we've got 2 branches, separate branches, and they're crossing, and they are in each other's ways. At least one of those needs to be cut back, and in this case I think probably both of these need to be cut back to open this up. So here's some of the whippy young growth that I'd missed during summer pruning, and that needs to be cut back. So here we've got a handy bit of wood. There's some fruit buds there, but here we've got a piece. Okay, there are some nice buds on the side, but this is going off vertically, and this is going to be, at least this length of the wood is going to be rather unproductive, and that needs to be cut back. I will probably take this back here somewhere. You can see on this one that there's just a mass of growth here, and a lot of this is not productive. So okay, there's a juicy fat bud on the end of this piece, but there's nothing on here. We've got a little bit of dieback up the top on this one, but none of this growth is useful. So all of that can be cut back, and that will help deal with the crowding on this tree. So here's an example of a piece of unhappy wood. This wood is split here. I don't know if it's just damaged or diseased, but it would probably be best if I cut this back somewhere here into solid wood. So a tree will often bear far more flowers than it can really sustain, and if you don't thin them out, although the tree will drop some young fruitlets later in the year, if you don't thin them out, then it will still try to produce far more fruit than it can reasonably do. And so you end up with smaller fruit, and fruit of rather inferior quality. So if you want good quality fruit, you have to thin them out. Now, it's okay to be thinning some of the young fruitlets out. That's absolutely fine, especially with apples and pears, which bear flowers in clusters. You will typically need to go through and remove 1, 2 or 3 from each cluster in order to get well-spaced fruit that have got a chance to develop properly. But it's also a good idea during winter pruning to remove just some of these fruiting spurs. We've got far too many in this area to be productive. Now, I rather like these. This is younger wood, and these are big, fat, healthy looking buds, so I'm inclined to keep that piece of wood. This, on the other hand, is older and a bit more scruffy looking, so maybe I'll cut one of those out and keep the other. So that's the general idea with the winter pruning. Now, the pears aren't too bad actually. They need to be thinned out in places and tidied up. The apples are a lot worse, and that's probably my fault. They are oriented in slightly the wrong direction. They run east to west, and that's not as good as with the pears, which are running north to south. Now, that was done for design reasons because of the layout of the original kitchen garden here. And I know we've renovated the garden and we've changed the layout, but we've still got that row running east to west. It's okay, but it's not ideal. And that does affect the balance of the growth a little bit. But I've probably been a little bit lax in winter pruning, and you only have to do that for a couple of years, and then they start to get a little bit out of hand. So with the apples in particular, I'm planning to cut them back quite hard in places. I've got too much unproductive wood there. One thing that's quite common with the cordons is to find that up the top here it becomes quite crowded with rather vigorous shoots. So this was probably the original leader, and that had been cut back, and then there's a whole bunch of wood has developed here, and really I need to cut this back and thin this out. I might remove this piece entirely. It's not doing anything particularly useful, and these parts of the trees often end up a little bit crowded. So the pears are looking quite good now already. The disease damaged wood, crossing wood, has been removed. All of the whippy growth that I'd missed during summer pruning has been cut back. And now I'm left with the job of thinning some of the spur systems. Now, I've already done some of them, but there's still more to do. So what I thought I'd do is just give a few examples to show how I'm going about that. So this tree has quite a lot of fruit buds on it. It's really quite well covered, and if all of those come good, there will be far too much fruit here. Each one of these buds, of course, will develop into a cluster of flowers, so I'm going to need to take some of those away. So if we look here, I've got 3 buds here, I've got 2 fat ones there, and I've got this whole cluster at the top, and that is far too many. So I think I'm going to cut that back here, and I'm going to remove at least those buds there. So here we've got another situation with far too many buds. We've got 2 on this branch here, and we've got 4 over here and 1 here, and that is quite a lot already. And then we've got this vertical wood going up, and we've got another cluster of flower buds. Now, I don't like this vertical wood anyway, and we have far too many buds here, so I'm just going to take that out. So here's another example. We've got 3 buds here, we've got several here. These are growth buds rather than fruit buds. You can see because they're smaller and more pointed. The fat round ones here, these are the flower buds. But we've got we've got plenty on this length, and we probably don't need all of these at this end, so I'm just going to take that out there. On this piece, I'm just going to cut that out. This, I don't want this vertical wood anyway, and that removes another pile of excess fruit buds. So here we've got some of this happens quite often. This wood is a little bit spindly, so it's not going to support a particularly heavy crop. We've got some nice fruit buds up the top, and although it is painful to remove them, I think I need to remove at least some of these, and I'm going to cut that other branch out there. This branch, I don't really like this one at all. It's got one juicy fruit bud on the very end, but then all of this is bare, so I'm going to cut that back to a bud down there. Now that still leaves plenty of fruit buds on this wood, more than enough for this year's crop, and so there's really no reason to leave this long wood on there, and this thinner wood can't really carry that much weight anyway. So here we've got a situation with 3 branches coming up, and this one here, if these 2 buds produced fruit, these are going to be in an awkward position in the middle of these other 2 branches. So they're going to be crowded in there. There's no room for the fruit to develop properly, so that little branch can come out. So here again we've got quite a few fruit buds in this area, and this piece of wood is really very nice. Obviously this is a piece of young wood, and it's got this nice collection of fruit buds. Too much fruit will be carried in this one region. This would need to be thinned quite extensively. But if this was somewhere else, so further into the tree, I would love this piece of wood, but it's just too much here, and it's too much on the end of this branch, and we've got so many fruit buds here that I'm actually going to take that off. Well, I thought I'd taken all of the damaged wood out, but I've clearly missed some. There's damage to the bark here. I don't really like the look of it. Now it's a pity, I'd like to keep this piece, but I think it's too close to this damaged wood, and I'll have to cut back further in order to get into some decent wood. So I'm going to take this off back here, and you can see here we're into healthy wood, so that should heal up nicely. So here's another piece that I've missed. Now, I'm not quite sure what to do with this. I could cut this back to here, or I could leave a stub and hope that a bud here will develop. And I think I might actually make a stub cut here and hope for some renewal. So with a bit of luck, one of the dormant buds in this area will develop and we'll get some regrowth. You can see that as I've cut back away from that damage, this wood looks perfectly healthy, and that probably means that was just some damage to the bark rather than any significant disease. So here we have an example of a fairly unproductive piece of timber. So we've got this vertical growth, which I don't like, and there are no fruit buds on any of this. So I'm actually going to remove that entire piece of wood, because we're quite a long way from the main stem here, and this growth is not helping me at all. So we've got some young wood here, and I don't know why this was left as long as it was, but there are no fruit buds on this, and there's really no reason to leave this piece of wood quite that long. So I'm going to cut this back to just one bud there. If lengths of unproductive wood are left long like that, it doesn't take many seasons before all of the growth is so far away from the main stem, and then you end up having to cut back quite hard. So here we have another example of a piece of young wood that's going to turn out to be rather unproductive. This is covered with small buds. These are growth buds, and this is just going to produce a mass of vegetation this year. And if we let that go, even though we might prune this back in the summer, we're going to be a long way from the main stem, even if we do end up with some fruit buds somewhere. So I think this sort of wood, this should have been cut back hard in the summer, but it was obviously missed. But I'm going to cut that back now, just to 1 or 2 buds. These will regrow probably quite vigorously, but then they will be pruned back to 1 bud in the summer, and hopefully we can develop a nice spur system here. This obviously had a damaged or diseased branch that was cut back in previous year, and it would be nice to regrow something here. We've got a similar length of young wood on here. Now that can be left. If you find a piece of wood that's, let's say, 6, 7, maybe even 8 inches long in the summer, and it's terminated with a fruit bud, as this is, you can actually just leave it. On the other hand, there are all these growth buds here, and I don't really want further growth away from the main stem, and this is only 1 fruit bud. I'm not that pleased with this entire length of wood. Okay, it's got a couple of buds here, but they're not that impressive. I think I will cut this back. I will cut that back to there. We'll get some growth from that bud in the summer, and I will cut that back again, and hopefully we'll get some fruit buds closer to the main stem here. You can see this piece of wood here is very vertical. I know there are some fruit buds up here, but we've got all these growth buds, and this is going to shoot away with vigorous vertical growth. And I don't really need all of those buds. I've got 2 nice ones here, and I've got 3 on this branch. So I'm actually going to take this vertical wood out entirely. I'm also going to cut back that. That's not productive wood, that's old. Now, these 2 are too close together. You can't have the fruit developing from here. This is a very spindly piece of wood, so that's not really good for much. I'm going to cut that out, and that opens this space up a little bit more. So here again we've got several fruit buds in reasonably good positions, and then we've got this vertical wood that's not particularly productive. There's 1 nice fruit bud here, but that's not a great piece of wood, and I don't really want any of that. Now I could cut that back to here, and I might think about that later. It's very often a good idea to cut back where you have to cut, and then step back and look at it and think about it before cutting further back. So I certainly want to cut back to this point, and I may then decide to cut that even further back. Not sure yet, so I'm just going to take that out here. So hopefully those examples have given an idea of what I'm trying to do with the winter pruning here, and how I'm trying to thin out the overcrowded spur systems. Now, if you have the choice, favour healthy, vigorous new wood over old wood. But very often the new wood is extension growth that is taking you further away from the main stem, and that therefore needs to be cut back. So if you do need to renew some old unproductive wood, I mean this piece here looks okay, but if I wanted to renew this at any point, I would cut back hard towards the main stem here, and there are dormant buds in this region that would then be stimulated into growth with any luck. and you can then redevelop this wood from this point. And it's not a bad idea if you've got some old unproductive wood to cut it back quite hard and try and get some renewal. But while there are still healthy fruit buds on here, then there's no reason for me to replace this piece of wood yet. So that's it for the pears. It's just a case of going over them probably in several passes and looking for wood that can be sensibly removed. So on to the apples, and here you can see an example of what not to do with a cordon. So this vertical stem here was just used to fill in some of the wasted space at the end of the row, but the stem should have been laid down to one side or the other, and you can see that it's become very dominant and really very large. So I'm going to have to deal with something here. It's far too vigorous, too much vertical growth. So I will probably decapitate this somewhat. I can't go back and fix the original mistake, but this should never have been tied in at this angle. But I can remove the top growth there, and hopefully some of the more horizontal branches I can develop into something a bit more productive. Right, so I've removed the top section of these large branches. Now new growth may well arise from here, and if it does, I will tackle that in the summer. But I'm hoping I can develop these lower branches into something a little bit more productive. But if we move on down the row here, you can see that this is a complete thicket of growth. There's not a lot of free space in here. There's this whippy young stuff that this probably should have come off during summer pruning, so for some reason a lot of that has been left behind. This growth is not particularly useful, a lot of this. It's coming out a long way from the trunk now, and there are no fruit buds on it, or very few. So this is unproductive wood, and I'm very much inclined to cut this sort of stuff back quite hard and try and rejuvenate these trees. Now here we do have some fruit buds, which is nice, but again they're quite a long way from the main trunk. I really want these buds back up here, so this is going to be a little bit tricky. I think I'm going to sacrifice quite a few of these buds for the sake of improving the structure of the trees, because I really want to sort this out. This is not good growth. We've got a lot of crossing, crowded wood here. We can't have all of that together, and that's not the worst place. This sort of growth is completely useless. This is all quite young wood, but it's just vigorous, overcrowded and unproductive. There are no fruit buds on this. I will be cutting this back quite hard into this old wood and hoping to rejuvenate this, because this is not at all useful. And well, when we get up to the top end of this specimen, you can see just how crowded it is, and a large portion of this has got to go. Now I'm going to have to be careful not to take too much off in one season, but I think a fair bit of this has got to go, because this is really unproductive wood. This is just vegetation. There are very few fruit buds up this end of the tree. Now I'm not entirely sure why the apples have gone quite so crazy. The pears are much better behaved. Now obviously I could have done a better job of pruning these at some point, because they've been allowed to run a little bit wild, but that's what I'm going to address today. So next time you see these, they will be very much thinned out. So here's an example of some damaged and diseased wood. So there's a split running along the branch here. This looks rather diseased, and this area here is quite unsightly. Now I don't know if there was something that we cut and didn't heal up properly, but this area here is not healthy. So I'm going to take this back down to here, and if the wood looks okay after I've cut it, then fine, but if not, then I'll take it a little bit further back, and I would hope that there will be a dormant bud here somewhere that will develop and replace this branch. But in any event, this wood looks quite unhealthy and is best removed. Well, now I've cut that back and there's no sign of disease in that wood there, so I will leave that with that stump, and hopefully we'll get some regrowth there. So the sun has just dropped behind the hedgerow, but I've managed to finish this before it gets dark. So I've cut the apples back quite hard, and whereas the summer pruning encourages the development of fruit buds, pruning in the winter encourages vegetative growth. So I'm expecting them to respond with quite vigorous new growth. At least I hope that's the case, and that I will work on over the summer and try to restore some fruiting wood to these trees. So I'll just show you down the row there. It's no longer crowded, that's for sure. So the pruning saw has been very busy today, and you can see I've cut some of these back quite a long way. But the wood wasn't great, it wasn't in great condition, and it wasn't particularly productive, so there's really no reason to keep it. This one at the end was certainly the worst for its overgrown state, and as you can see, these are fairly major cuts that I've made here. I don't know how this is going to respond, probably with a mass of new growth, and I would expect next winter to remove some of these, possibly back to the main stem. I'll have to see what happens. It all depends how it responds in the summer. But there was really nothing of any value to all of the growth that was up this end of the tree. So yeah, this one's been cut back quite harsh all the way down. This is probably the worst one in the row for having, well, fairly sparse growth really. These branches are quite widely spaced. This one never did develop quite as well as some of the others. Its neighbour here is far better. It's populated much more thickly all the way down, and on this one I've kept some of the fruit buds, so maybe we'll get a few apples this year. I have still cut back some of these longer pieces, and especially that one down the bottom. You can see that, I mean, that's going to regrow quite vigorously, and I'll have to think about what to do with that, because this piece of wood is far too vertical, and that's why it's so vigorous. But these other branches are better, and if we just get a little bit of new growth on these, I'll be quite happy. This one's not too bad. This one was, well, this was desperately sad pruning this, because this is one of my favourite apples, the Ribston Pippin, and this had quite long growth sticking out way into the path, and that's all had to be cut off. The only fruit buds it had there were too far from the main trunk. They had to be removed. So it was very sad seeing all the Ribston Pippin fruit buds taken off, but had to be done. Hopefully in the longer term it will be worth doing. Now there's still more work to do on these, but I don't think I can do it this year. They've had more than enough abuse for one season. So that's it for this year's winter pruning. I'll return to these later in the year when they're in blossom or when I'm thinning out the fruitlets, and then later in the summer when I do the summer pruning. So thanks very much for watching, and bye for now.